Hey y'all, so in today's video, I'm going to talk about 4 alternatives to buying a building for your nonprofit. Let's get into it. Hey y'all, it's Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. If you need help, make sure you are subscribed because I drop videos every single week. And today I wanted to cover a topic that comes up a lot. So a lot of people who are starting their nonprofits really are interested in either securing 2 things, a van or a building. That question comes up a lot for me. How do I get money to get a van? How do I get money for a building, for a space to do my programming? And so I thought I would tackle that topic a little differently today. So like, what would you do, or what can you do in the meantime before you get to that point, until you're able to get a building? What can you do as an alternative? So that's what I want to talk about today. And also I want you to wait to the end because I'm going to share some things you should consider before you decide to take on a building, whether that's a mortgage or a lease. So I just want you to hang out just a little bit longer after I go through these 4 alternatives, just to hear some of the things you need to be thinking about. And as always, if you're struggling with the startup of your nonprofit, make sure you download my free startup checklist, which is in the description box below. And I also have a startup workbook that can take you through the first year of your nonprofit. Okay, so here are 4 alternatives to actually securing your own building when you're running programs for your nonprofit. So the first alternative is to look into libraries or community centers or community spaces where people tend to congregate, or community spaces that are owned by the local government. So in my local area, we have park and planning, and there are a bunch of community centers, and in those community centers, they have multi-purpose spaces that you can rent out for parties, but you could also do that for programming. So the first thing I would recommend you do is just do an inventory of what's available in your local community, which are looking into spaces that are basically funded by your local government, like libraries and community centers. And if they're not free, because some of the spaces that they offer up are not free, they're at least low cost, especially if you're a particular resident of the county or the locality that you live in. So the first alternative I want you to think about is there a place where you can do community programming in a space that's already set up and funded by the local government? So that's number 1. The number 2 alternative you should think about is places of worship. So usually in places of worship, there's one day in the week where that's their day of worship, right? Now look, I know there are some churches every day of the week, right? But generally there's one day which is designated as like the Sabbath or as a day of worship, which means that the other days and other times they have space available. And a lot of these churches and other places of worship have really nice spaces. You know, they're hooked up with sound, they're hooked up with technology and equipment, and the space goes unused during the week. So another option is to look at all the different places of worship in your community and see if they are willing to rent out space to you or even give away space. And I would definitely start with your connections. Where do you worship? Where does your board worship? Where does people in your family or people that you know, where do they worship? And can they spread the word and ask the people that they're associated with to help? And see, the great thing about doing this with a place of worship is it's not just about a transaction. It's not just about you getting a space so you can do your thing, but it's also about building a relationship. You have a built-in support network in that place of worship. So there are people who work different places, who live different places, who have many different people that they're associated with. And you can tap into that because you're working with the organization or because they're giving you space. So I definitely recommend that you leverage the relationship. So don't just look at it as a way to get space for where you need to do your programming, but build a relationship with the pastor or whoever's the head of the place of worship. Figure out if they have an outreach committee or they do community service. Can you partner and do things together? Can they help you fundraise and bring in money or bring in donations for items that you need for your nonprofit? So don't just look at it as a space opportunity, but look at it, as with anything, as a relationship opportunity. Alternative number 3 is other nonprofits. So there are other established nonprofits who are thinking the same way as you. They thought, oh, we need space. We need a place where we can do our programming. And they may have space that's set up for exactly the type of work that you're trying to do. Maybe there's a nonprofit that serves the same population as you. Maybe they serve young people, but they don't do the kind of work that you do. Maybe they work in academics and your music program. And so it could be a great complement to the work that they're doing if you approach them and say, hey, we would like to partner, and is it possible that we could use some of your space to do some of our programming? And you could absolutely tap into the people or the population they're already serving, and that actually is a win-win because they have a new opportunity for the people they're serving, and you have a built-in population where you don't have to do as much recruitment and trying to figure out who's going to be added to your programs. So other nonprofits in your area is a great idea to think about how you can, again, leverage relationships. Here's a quick mistake that I see a lot of new nonprofit founders make. They think because they have a nonprofit, first of all, that everything should be free and they shouldn't have to pay for everything. And then they get mad when people don't want to give away things to them. That's not the right way to look at it. But the other thing and the other mistake I see people make is that they don't go into the conversation thinking about what value they can provide to the person that they want to ask something from or ask something of, right? So just like with any relationship, you don't want to make it seem like it's unbalanced. You don't want it to be that you're just coming asking for something, and once you get what you need, you moving on and do what you need to do. Think about, how can I be of assistance to the person that I'm asking for help with, right? So what can I do for them? And so with other nonprofits, there are skill sets that you may have that they don't have, or there's a type of work that you do that they don't do. And so there's opportunity there for you all to partner, for you to brainstorm about ways that you can continue your relationship or deepen your relationship. So just as I mentioned with the places of worship, don't just look at it as a transaction. Look at it as a way to start an ongoing relationship where you can help each other and you can bring value to each other. The fourth alternative is to do your work virtually. So you do all of your programming or the majority of your programming over Zoom or some other video conference software, all right? So the pandemic taught us that that's not odd. Remember before 2020, I don't ever remember getting on Zoom more than maybe once every couple of weeks, but now I have to get on Zoom every single day. So it's not weird or odd that you could do some of your programming even after the pandemic kind of winds down, hopefully. It's not odd for you to do virtual programming. Now here's the thing. I know that there's absolutely nothing that can replace human connection, being in the same room, seeing people eye to eye, reading body language, all of that. But as a new nonprofit, you have to go with what you have and what you don't have. And if you don't have money to maintain a space, you absolutely can start building connections and building relationships using virtual programming so you can get to know whoever that you're serving. And then eventually, if you want to get together in person, at least you've begun to build that relationship with those people so that you can continue to work. So I know that it's not appealing to do only virtual stuff. I know that if there's an opportunity to be in person, it probably makes more sense in most circumstances to be in person, but you can absolutely leverage meeting virtually to begin to build a relationship with people. And then when you start meeting back in person and have a place to do your work, you can then start deepening those relationships with the people that you're serving. Okay, so I promised at the end of this video to give you some things to consider as you're talking about buying a building, or even if you're talking about like purchasing a van or just getting stuff for your nonprofit, right? Here's some things I want you to consider, particularly around getting a building: the mortgage and or the lease. Now, it sounds really simple, right? You're probably saying, Tiffany, of course, if we have to get a building, I know we got to pay the mortgage and we know we got to pay the lease. But some people really do think that nonprofits don't have to pay a mortgage or don't have to pay monthly fees. And that's really not the case. So if you are trying to secure a building, you got to budget for what it's going to cost for you to pay a lease payment every month or pay the mortgage. Do you have enough cash flow to be able to cover it so you don't get behind? You don't want to acquire debt as a nonprofit. You don't want that to be reflected on your financial statements when you have to submit that to funders or major donors. So you want to make sure you're ahead of the game and that you're paying attention to the actual money you're going to need on a monthly basis to even maintain it. And I would ask myself, if you just meet with your participants once a month, what I would really ask myself is, at this point in time in our development, do we really need a space if we're only meeting with people once a month? Is the investment worth it? And it may or it may not be. I can't answer that for you, but you absolutely need to ask yourself that question. Is it worth it for us right now to make that move? And sometimes it's not. So I just want to make sure you're not going into this lightly and that you're making smart decisions when you decide to acquire a building. Here's the other thing that we don't think about. We don't think about maintenance. We don't think about lights. We don't think about heat. We don't think about repairs. We don't think about the air breaking down. And I'm telling you, if you lease a space, just count on the air and or the heat breaking at least once a year. At least once a season, it's going to break down. So have you budgeted in times for people to come in to repair things? Now, if you don't own the space, you may not have to pay for all of that. But what does that mean in terms of your programming when you don't have air or when you don't have heat? Like, all of this means you need to have contingency plans for what may be. And so when you begin to have space or have things, you have to think about the impact on more than just you, right? You have to think about the totality of your programming, including the space that you have to maintain. Here's another thing that people really miss: insurance. Now, as a nonprofit, you should have some sort of liability insurance at a minimum. So in my nonprofit startup workbook, the link is in the description box below, I have a whole worksheet dedicated to insurance. So if you do not have any insurance right now and you're running a nonprofit, you really need to consider the type of coverage you need at a minimum. So I'm not saying this is it, but at a minimum, you should have liability insurance. And if you have a space where people are coming to, you need to think about coverage for slips and falls and mistakes and accidents and all those kinds of things that you may not have considered if you were just running your nonprofit out of your house. So I want you to think about the kind of insurance coverage you're going to need and what you need to be able to cover things like deductibles and stuff like that. That's especially true if you want like a van. You got to think about car insurance, right? Because it's much more likely that you're going to get into an accident or something's going to happen if you have a car too. So think about insurance as well. And the other thing I'll just throw out there is weather, right? So when you have people who are coming together, you're congregating in a space, there are weather considerations that you have to think about. So what's your policy around snow? What's your policy around your volunteers and staff and expectations for coming in? You know, I live on the East Coast, so we have to deal with snow, right? So what are you doing around snow days, right? So you have to start considering, because you have a place to come to, what that means for your programming if something is impacting access or your ability to use the space the way you want it to. So I hope all of those things that I mentioned gave you some good food for thought as you're thinking about acquiring a building for a nonprofit. I wish you so much success with your nonprofit journey. And look, if you need help with your nonprofit, don't forget to visit me at www.bossonabudget.com. Otherwise, I hope I will see you in my next video. All right, y'all. Bye.